Okay, so in this lecture, I want to say a bit about just how everything we've learned about Kantian ethics so far fits together. And I think the first question here really is, how does the formula of universal law relate to the formula of humanity? Kant gives us two formulations of the categorical imperative. What are we supposed to do with that? Why does he do that? You know, how do we know which formulation to use? And what do we do if they give us different answers? If the formula of humanity says one thing and the formula of universal law says another, what would we do with that? Well, Kant thinks that properly understood, these two principles complement each other. They actually fit together, he thinks. And he thinks that properly understood, they say the same thing. They are different ways of putting the same point, according to Kant. And Kant goes even further and says, well, it doesn't matter which one you use, because these are both always going to give you the same answer. You know, they're identical formulas. He thinks, one's just easier to set up and use in some cases, the other's easier to use in another. Use whichever one you want, they'll give you the same answers. Now look, on that last point, whether the two actually always give you the same answers and say exactly the same thing, there's some debate on this. A lot of people have challenged this, that there are some weird cases where they don't. I tend to think that's right, but I don't think we really need to talk about this because they're actually really weird cases. You kind of have to set them up kind of artificially to get these two to give you different answers. And I think no matter what, the formula of humanity and the formula of universal law are not just these different unrelated principles. They actually do link up with each other very closely, and they do complement one another. So how is that? Well, look, the fact that something fails the formula of universal law often shows how it uses someone as a mere means and who it uses as a mere means. And it often does this in ways that we might miss. Well, okay, how is that? Well, consider cheating on a test. Could everyone always cheat on a test? No, right? In a world where everybody always cheated on every test, one of two things would happen. Either professors would make very sure you couldn't cheat, they'd have people going around the room, they'd record you taking the test. It would be impossible to cheat. They would make it impossible to cheat. Or, if everybody just cheated and nobody did anything to stop it, grades would be meaningless, right? Grades wouldn't reflect anything you've actually learned or any work you've put in. Well, notice what this shows. The fact that you could maybe successfully cheat on a test depends on the fact that not everybody does that. And that in a very real way shows that if you cheat, you are freeloading on all the honest people who either take the bad grade they earn or put in the work to earn a good grade, right? You freeload on all the honest people who don't cheat because you need their effort for cheating to be possible. If you cheat on a test, you use them as a mere means, and the formula of universal law shows how that is. And I think you might very well miss that if you didn't think about the formula of universal law. Or consider riding mass transit without paying. What would the world be like if everybody tried to ride mass transit, the bus or the subway, without paying? Either they would make darn sure you have to pay, or there just wouldn't be any buses or subways or whatever, right? The fact that you could maybe ride mass transit without paying, that you could cheat, depends on the fact not everybody does it. Again, the way this fails the formula of universal law shows that if you did it, you would be freeloading on the honest people who pay what they're supposed to ride the bus or the train or whatever. In both of these cases, you are freeloading on the honest people who either don't cheat or pay what they're supposed to. You are using them as a mere means. And the formula of universal law reveals that, right, in a really interesting way. Now look, most scholars, most people who study Kant, think that the formula of humanity has priority over the formula of universal law in some way. And, I've presented it this way because I tend to agree. I think the formula of humanity explains what the formula of universal law is really about and why it's important, right? Formula of universal law isn't just important because it's like, oh, okay, here's this rule. We all love rules. That's often the stereotype of Kant people present. No, it's important because it shows how actions that we might not realize use others as a mere means. It shows how and why it does. All right. Now, if the formula of humanity has priority, which I think it does, there's some issues with the formula of humanity. Some questions we need to answer. The biggest one is to whom or what does it apply? Look, I love Star Trek, so I'll give you guys a Star Trek example. In the original Star Trek, you have Mr. Spock, this alien. He's not human. I guess he's half human, but whatever. Yeah, Mr. Spock, he's not fully human. With the formula of humanity, say you can do whatever you want to Spock, right? If we have, want to send somebody down to this dangerous planet, it's going to get killed. Do we send Spock because he's not a human? Formula of humanity doesn't apply to him, right? Is that the case? Star Trek The Next Generation, which I think is better than the original. I have strong opinions about this, but whatever. There is this android, Mr. Data. Well, Data's obviously not a human. He's made of chips and circuits and pieces of metal. There's an episode where, this one person wants to disassemble Mr. Data to see how he works so he can maybe make another Mr. Data. Mr. Data does not want to be disassembled. Would it be okay to force Mr. Data to let this guy disassemble him? Guy thinks he can probably put Data back together, but, probably is not great, right? Would it be okay to force Data to let this guy disassemble him, who could probably maybe put him back together, even though Data doesn't want to be disassembled? Well, he's not a human, right? Well, I bring these cases up because the name, the formula of humanity, is a little misleading. In some places, Kant calls it the formula of rational nature, and I actually think if you're being very exact, this is probably a little better. Why is that? Well, I say the formula of rational nature because remember, for Kant, reason is what's important, being rational, being a rational being. And for Kant, remember, what it is to be rational is to act for reasons and to be able to decide what are and aren't good reasons. Anything that could do that, anything that could act for reasons and has the ability to decide what are and aren't good reasons, for it would count. Would be covered by Kant's somewhat misleadingly titled Formula of Humanity, better called Formula of Rational Nature, right? I mean, look, we can excuse Kant for calling this the Formula of Humanity. The only things that he was familiar with that could act for reasons that had rationality are human beings. That's still the case. But if we do encounter aliens who can do this, they're covered. If we create an android who can do it like Mr. Data, it's covered. If we genetically engineer a dog to be super duper smart, it would be covered as well. Anything that is rational, that can act for reasons and decide what are and aren't good reasons for it, counts and cannot be used as a mere means. Well, but that raises another question once we think about that, right? Because not all human beings are able to do that, right? Not all human beings are rational in this sense that Kant has in mind, right? Not all human beings can act for reasons. Not all human beings, can decide what are and aren't good reasons for them. You have human beings who've lost this ability. The elderly with severe dementia. People with really bad forms of insanity. People with severe brain damage. You have people who've not yet developed this ability, right? I say children here, I should maybe say babies. But definitely at a certain age, people don't have this ability, right? Now, the consensus here is both count. Both people who've lost the ability to be rational to act for reasons and decide what are not good reasons in people who have not yet developed it. One of them counts because they once had this ability, the other counts because they will develop it. Now, we don't necessarily have to respect the wishes of these people in the way we do cognitively normal adults, right? If a cognitively normal adult wants to do something that we think is harmful for him, Kantianism would say within certain bounds, we have to respect that, it's up to him to decide what he wants to do, even if you think it's not a great idea. You're not respecting his reason if you stop him, right? There might be some bounds on this when what he wants to do harm others directly or indirectly, but for the most part, Kant will say respecting people's reason, means letting them act for what they think are good reasons, even if you might not agree, right? We don't have to do that with the insane. We don't have to do that with the severely demented, perhaps. We definitely don't have to do that with children, right? If your baby wants to stick something dangerous in his mouth, I'm having this a lot, and he really wants to do it, and you see him do it, getting ready to do it, and you snatch it away, you have not done anything wrong, right? Because the baby does not have this ability, you don't necessarily have to respect his wishes, right? Children are more of a borderline case. They're starting to develop abilities to reason, but still, you don't have to necessarily let children do things that are bad for them, even if they really think they have a good reason to do it, because they've not fully developed this ability yet. Now, how to apply this to these borderline cases can be hard, but that's how Kant would handle them. Now, two harder cases are what about human beings with profound disabilities who never had or never will have reason as Kant defines it. Right? If you have a severe mental disability, you might never develop this ability to reason no matter what. And what about animals, right? There's some debate about whether some animals have enough mental ability to qualify for Kant. Some people think dolphins do. Some people think chimps might. The evidence about animal cognition is pretty mixed, right? Some birds are really smart, but most animals definitely don't have rationality as Kant defines it. There are borderline cases, chimps, some birds, dolphins, maybe elephants, but a cow does not have rationality as Kant defines it. A dog, a cat, does not have rationality as Kant defines it. That's very clear, right? Dogs, cats, cows, domestic turkeys all lack this ability. Goodness, if you've ever been around a domestic turkey, do they lack this ability? They are quite possibly the dumbest animal on the earth. I cannot describe how dumb domestic turkeys are, but anyway. Animals don't have this ability. They are definitely not covered, most of them anyway, by the formula of humanity, or this formula of rational nature, as you might call it if you were being a bit more exact, right? So for Kantianism, it's hard not to conclude that neither these people who have profound disabilities and aren't rational and never will be count, and it's hard to say that animals count. Now, this seems to me a bit counterintuitive, right? Kant tries to deal with this when it comes to animals. He says, well, people who are mean to animals, that tends to warp your character in a way that makes it easier for you to be cruel to people. And if you've ever watched these horrible serial killer documentaries, Kant's probably right. There's always this part where they say, and then, young whoever started torturing the neighborhood cats, right? Or dogs or whatever. But, it seems to me that it's wrong to hurt animals for no good reason, not just because it makes it easier to hurt people, but it just seems like it's wrong in and of itself. And Kantianism has trouble with that. It also has trouble with saying that there's anything wrong with treating the profoundly and permanently mentally disabled in whatever way we want to. That also seems a little weird to me. And notice there's huge differences with utilitarianism and natural law theory. Utilitarianism says animals count. Why would animals count? They can feel pleasure and pain just as much as we can. In fact, many forms of utilitarianism will say animals count just as much as we do. If a chicken can feel pain and pleasure, which it can, chickens are pretty stupid, but they can feel pain and pleasure. If a chicken can feel pain and pleasure are what matters, it's hard not to conclude that, the chicken matters just as much as we do. That seems a little too radical to me, at least. But on the other hand, this claim that animals count and that utilitarianism can account for that, that at least seems a little more intuitive than Kantianism. Natural law theory will say even the most severely cognitively disabled human beings count. And they count just as much as you or me. Why do they count? They are biologically human, right? For Kant, humanity is just a shorthand for having this ability to act for reasons, to be rational. Natural law theory will say, no, Kant, when we say humanity, we mean humanity, biologically human. All right. Just those are some stark differences with the theories we've looked at already. Let's talk about some other issues here, though. Now, the formula of humanity is inspiring, right? This great call to human dignity. And there's clearly, to my mind, something intuitively right about it, right? If someone says, you used me, that has a lot of intuitive punch, right? And that just seems like, if they say you used me, it's like, okay, that's why this is wrong, right? You shouldn't just use others as mere means, right? But it's not entirely clear what it is to use someone as a mere means. Now look, what I mean by this, I mean there are some clear cases, right? If you lie to your friend to get money, you have used him as a mere means. If someone holds a gun to somebody's head and asks for their wallet, they're using that person as a mere means. But there are also many borderline cases, right? If there's a hurricane and I don't have any clean drinking water and you come in and decide to make money and I don't have any way to get water otherwise, and you offer to sell me your water, but you want $30 for a bottle of water, knowing that I can't turn it down because I'm so thirsty and I have nowhere else to get it, have you used me as a mere means? You didn't create the situation. You don't force me directly to do what you want in the way that you would if you held a gun to my head. But it also seems like I don't have an ability to say no, right? If a factory offers really low wages to people, knowing that the area is super poor and people can't say no to it, are they using them as mere means? And, here's another borderline case. Let's say you and I are negotiating the price of something, right? If you guys have ever watched, I don't know, it's whatever, but you see this a lot. There's this show I used to waste time watching, Pawn Stars, somebody will come in and they'll come in with some priceless family heirloom, and they basically, it's set in Vegas, they want to use the money to go play slots, right? They'll sell grandma's priceless teacup from the old country. They'll come in and the guy will say, well, it's worth $10,000, but you know what? I have to make a profit, so I can give you $7. And the guy says, well, all the people I've had appraised it say 15, and you don't need, it's just a teacup, it doesn't take up that much space, super rare, I couldn't take a dime less than 12. They go round and round and round, and eventually they'll, settle on 9,000 or something, right? And neither party seems to be telling the flat-out truth, right? If the guy says, I couldn't take a dime less than 15 and then settles on 9, and the guy says, well, I couldn't give you a dime over 7 and settles on 9, both seem to be fibbing, but is it clear they're using each other as mere means, right? Both parties tend to you know, kind of maybe know what the other's up to. What do you think about borderline cases like this? Now, look, here's what Kant will say to parties. He'll say, look, we should not have unreasonable expectations for a moral theory. What is it you want a moral theory to do? Kant will say, you utilitarians, at the end of the day, you guys want a mathematical model of morality, plug in variables x, y, and z and get answer w out. That's just not the way moral reasoning works. And that's not what we should want a moral theory to do. Kant thinks a moral theory, the better reason to have one, is to keep us from deceiving ourselves in cases where it's clear what morality requires of us. And Kant will say, look, my theory is not going to give you some algorithm for deciding what's right and wrong. And you shouldn't expect that out of a moral theory. Figuring out hard cases requires judgment and discussion with others, right? And a lot of people who come after Kant will emphasize this, right? You want to figure out whether an action uses someone as a mere means. Well, talk to everyone affected, see what people say. Discussion is important. And look, doing the morally right thing, Kant will say, requires judgment, or as you might put it, common sense, right? But now I do think we can say a little bit more about what it is to treat someone as an end in themselves. And I think Nagel and Rachel's articles will both help with that, right? They'll give us a fuller sense, some better ideas of how we might figure out what treats people as mere means and what treats them as ends in themselves. And they'll also help to deal with a bigger problem. And that bigger problem is that on some interpretations, the formula of humanity seems ridiculously strict. Let me tell you what I have in mind. If someone is trying to mug me or just beat me up, and I have some pepper spray in my back pocket and I just give him a face full of pepper spray, well, that keeps him from doing what he wants, right? That disables him. That definitely seems to interfere with his free choice. He wants to beat me up or kill me or take my wallet. I shoot him in the face with pepper spray. He's writhing on the ground in pain. It seems to interfere with his free choice. It seems to interfere with his decisions, right? Heck, even if I just punch him in the nose, right? But it definitely seems like that we can defend ourselves from violence from other people. If we can't, we just have to let them use us as mere means. That doesn't seem reasonable, right? But if we fight back against an aggressor, well, then it seems like we don't respect their freedom, right? That seems ridiculous. Nagel will have something to say about that. The formula of humanity also might seem to forbid criminal punishment, right? The whole point of a lot of criminal punishment is we limit somebody's freedom, right? We put them in a jail and they can't go out and do what they want. Even if we just find somebody, we're still limiting their freedom. They might not want to give up that money, and we say, well, if you don't give up that money, you're going to jail, right? What if a judge says, all right, we're sentencing you to 5 years in prison, and the criminal says, no, judge, I don't want to do that, and, I know you have to maintain order in society and all that, pal, but you can't use me as a mere means, so you got to let me walk out of here. See y'all later. You think I should go to jail? I don't like that. You have to respect my reason. You can't use me as a mere means. I'm going to go out and do some more murdering. Or stealing or whatever, right? That would also be ridiculously strict. What will Kant say about that? I think when we properly understand the formula of humanity, it allows us to fight back. It might even require it. And it also not only allows society to punish criminals, in fact, it requires that. It definitely does. So we'll see how and why that is next in the next couple lectures and get a fuller sense of what the formula of humanity really is.